Welcome back to Folder Decoder. In this series, I choose a chip folder that I've personally used throughout the Battle series, or that has been suggested by viewers in the comments to highlight in a video. The idea is to break down each folder to see which chips go in the folder, and to see how each one works, then show it off in-game. Keep in mind that the folders I feature in this series are not intended to be used in PvP matches. Net battling online is completely different from playing through the story and post-game content of each Battle game, and while I do have some knowledge of PvP in Battle 6, I don't have enough knowledge in the other games to recommend any PvP folders. With the disclaimer out of the way, it's time to join the dark side for today's folder. Today, we're once again going to be looking at a series of Navi chips in Battle 3. Yeah, I know, how very original of me. But the chip I'm working with today is actually really interesting, both in the way it works and in the way that it actually impacted the next two games in the series. Which sounds like a future Network Evolution episode now that I think about it. Just like the Bubbleman folder that I've discussed previously on Folder Decoder, this folder utilizes a Navi chip that is capable of hitting enemies several times and potentially getting instant deletions if used properly, that being the Darkman series of chips. Darkman has plenty of attacks that the chip could have pulled from, but Capcom decided to go with his Black Wing attack. The Darkman chip works in exactly the same way as that attack. It opens 3 dark holes over your opponent's area and sends out bats down each column to attack. And yes, if you've played Battle 4 and 5, this might look familiar to you. Darkman chips were the precursor to the evil chip Blackwing in those games, but we'll get into that another time. The Darkman chips have quite a few similarities with the Bubbleman chips. First off, every chip in the Darkman series has the same attack value of 30, similar to how every Bubbleman chip has a value of just 20. This, however, is made up for by the fact that both chips fire off multiple hits, letting you deal a lot of damage if you power up the Navi chips. However, unlike the Bubbleman, Plantman, and Flashman folders I've mentioned previously in this series, the Darkman chips don't have an element. This means that you can't use element plus 30 chips and will instead have to rely on Navi plus 20 chips. Though, to be honest, we're about to see why that's not actually a downside at all. Another similarity between Bubbleman and Darkman is that the number of attacks is increased with each successive chip, hence why each Darkman chip has a damage value of 30. Each version of the chip does more damage than the previous one because of the increased number of hits. Darkman V1 sends out a total of 16 bats, V2 sends out 18, V3 sends out 20, and V4 sends out 22 bats. The thing about the bats being sent out is that they don't track enemies. Even if a column has no enemies in it, that column will still have bats spawn into it, decreasing the damage of the Darkman chips. And while this doesn't sound great, there is a way to avoid this situation. Conveniently, the Metagel chip also comes in a decode alongside the Darkman chips, and that's how we'll maximize the damage output of Darkman. Those chips only open dark holes on columns where your opponent has panels. By stealing your opponent's area, you decrease the number of dark holes that form, causing more bats to spawn out of each hole. And if you completely column or panel lock an enemy, Darkman forms only one dark hole, meaning that every bat attacks that same column, with every one hitting your opponent. Effectively, Darkman V4 hits opponents 22 times total, dealing 660 damage without any Navi plus 20 chips. Throw in a few of those, and even a Navi plus 40 for good measure, and Darkman V4 can deal a massive 2,860 damage. That is 20 damage shy of the famous Silver Bullet combo. And of course, you can also use other chips to help supplement the Darkman chips as well. Other than Metagel, you can use Area Grab in the Star Code, which you do have access to either 1 or 3 of in shops depending on the version that you're playing. Other good support chips in the decode include chips such as Rook or Discord. I personally love using the Rook chip, but I've also loved playing chess since before I even got into the Battle series, so there might be some bias there. And of course, I'm going to include Fast Gauge, Full Cust, and Navi Recycle or Folder Back depending on the version you're playing. Seriously, if I don't mention Fast Gauge or Full Cust in these videos, it means there's an imposter taking over my channel. Offensively, you can include chips such as Plasma 1, Bubbler, or Bubble V, each of which comes in a decode and don't cause flashing, letting you combo them together. Other notable chips in decode include chips like Slasher to help you deal with Navis like Protoman or Beastman, Variable Sword, Yo-Yo 1, Ice Wave 3, and many others. Personally, I like sticking to the chips that don't cause flashing for this folder, especially the Plasma chips since that works well with Metagel, but you can of course customize the folder to include your favorite chips instead. And lastly, for defense, there's of course the Invis chips as always, but there's also Life Aura if you don't mind replacing one of the Darkman chips for it. With the folder's explanation done, let's take a look at this folder in action. And that's it for the Darkman folder. This one is pretty straightforward, with just the goal of stealing an opponent's area to leave them in their back column before going for powered up Darkman, getting the maximum number of hits. I do have to warn you that some Navis in the game, notably Gutsman and Protoman, can use area grab against you as well, so you should be cautious about stealing their area too early. That being said, they're limited to 3 copies of that chip, whereas you have access to 4 Metagels and at least 1 area grab yourself, so even their area grabs shouldn't be an issue. And then there's Kingman. You can't get max damage from Darkman against Kingman, just use Plantman against him instead. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel for some more Battle Network content. I have several series relating to the Battle Network games, including this Folder Decoder series, limited folder runs, and essay videos about various Battle Network topics or about specific chips throughout the series. And if you're a fan of Pokemon, I also do Nuzlocke and other runs of Pokemon games as well. And as always, thanks for watching.